Princess Leonor's next chapter raises important questions for the crown. Picture the hush of a cathedral just before dawn. Stone walls cold with centuries of memory. Light barely touching the altar. In that stillness, Spain's legacy feels almost audible, not loud, not dramatic, but insistent. This is the atmosphere surrounding the crown right now. Quiet, heavy, watchful. Because Spain's monarchy is entering a phase where silence no longer simply protects, it provokes questions. A single glance reveals the burden of centuries resting on youthful shoulders. And yet, this moment is not defined by what Princess Leonor has done, but by what comes next. The preparation phase is giving way to something more complex. Something less rehearsed. Something that carries consequence. Behind the crown lies a steady heartbeat, but the gaze of a nation is sharpening. And here is the detail almost nobody outside the palace fully understands: the next chapter is not about visibility. It's about interpretation. Every action will now be read not as training, but as signal. Spain's monarchy is under pressure, not because of crisis, but because of transition. And transitions are when institutions are most closely examined. Imagine the echo of footsteps in a palace corridor, each one carrying centuries of expectation. Those echoes feel louder now. Not because the steps are heavier, but because the walls are listening. This title returns here, quietly but firmly. Princess Leonor's next chapter raises important questions for the crown. Not speculation, not gossip. Questions of structure, of legitimacy, of timing. This is not spectacle, it is consequence. Because the crown does not move forward alone. It moves with the state, with the constitution, with national memory. And as Leonor's responsibilities deepen, the margin for ambiguity narrows. But what happens when preparation ends and interpretation begins? That is the first question hovering in the air. Spain's monarchy is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of constitutional continuity. It exists precisely because it does not improvise. Every gesture echoes governance. Every appearance reinforces the idea that the crown stands above politics, yet firmly within law. This distinction matters more than it appears. As Leonor steps further into public responsibility, her actions will no longer be understood as practice. They will be treated as precedent. And precedent, once set, becomes expectation. This is rarely explained in full context. Observers often ask when she will step up, as if leadership is a switch to be flipped. But monarchy does not operate on activation. It operates on alignment, with institutions, with public trust, with historical rhythm, and alignment raises its own questions. Because the closer Leonor moves toward the center of national life, the more her personal discipline intersects with institutional demand. Restraint, once praised, will eventually be measured against resolve. And just when it seems clear, a deeper question emerges. Is the crown ready for the moment when caution must coexist with clarity? The phrase on the thumbnail isn't just design. The questions begin. That single line carries more weight than most realize. It signals a shift, from observing preparation to evaluating direction. This is Spain's continuity compressed into words. Notice the subtle change in tone around her recent appearances. The posture remains controlled, but the framing feels different. Less protective, more expectant. A subtle signal that the audience is being invited closer, not into intimacy, but into accountability. Headlines frame these moments as ceremonial milestones. But insiders speak of recalibration, of moving from insulation to exposure. Carefully, deliberately. And here's the moment almost nobody outside the palace has ever considered. Questions are not a threat to monarchy. They are a test of its maturity. Institutions that endure do not fear scrutiny. They absorb it. Protocol becomes even more important now. Every order of precedence, every symbolic placement, even the choice of events attended or declined carries amplified meaning. What once felt routine now feels deliberate. Few realize how deeply this ties into centuries of royal protocol. Crowds still cheer. The warmth is real. But the silence between applause has changed. It is no longer just anticipation. It is evaluation. And that is the shift. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling? Behind closed doors, discussions grow more precise. Not about image, but about sequence. What responsibility comes next? What silence must be maintained? What presence is required? Because the crown does not ask whether Leonor is ready in abstract terms. It asks whether the institution is ready to let her be seen as ready. This is the second question. Spain's monarchy survives because it adapts, balancing tradition with modern legitimacy. Adaptation, however, must never look like reaction. That is the danger. Move too fast, and the crown appears uncertain. Move too slowly, and it appears detached. This is the tightrope. And yet, beneath the surface, the monarchy's continuity is being quietly tested. This moment, subtle as it seems, foreshadows challenges still to come. The midpoint arrives not as pause, but escalation. Ceremony gives way to scrutiny. The crown moves from ritual into trial, and every eye is watching. Here, the questions sharpen. Not, who is Princess Leonor? But, what kind of crown will follow her? This is where tradition collides with modern expectation. Modern Spain wants relevance without erosion, transparency without trivialization, humanity without informality. These demands are not contradictory, but they are difficult to balance. And this is where thoughtful leadership matters more than impulse. This detail is often misunderstood outside Spain. The monarchy's role is not to lead conversation, but to stabilize it. To offer continuity when everything else shifts. Leonor's next chapter is being shaped with that principle in mind. But stability does not mean invisibility. There will be moments ahead where presence must be unmistakable. Where silence would feel like absence. Where the crown must speak, not loudly, but clearly. This is the third question forming now. How does a monarchy trained in restraint choose its moments of assertion? The climax arrives quietly. Not in scandal, not in declaration, but in recognition. Recognition that the preparation phase is ending. Recognition that interpretation has begun. Recognition that the future queen is no longer being observed only for discipline, but for direction. At this point, every gesture carries the weight of Spain's constitutional future. And yet, the crown carries deeper implications than anyone dares to admit. Because once questions are allowed to surface, they cannot be unasked. They must be answered, not with speed, but with coherence. This is where the monarchy's survival shifts from ritual to reality. What seems ceremonial now may prove decisive later. The next chapter will not erase restraint. It will test it. Under pressure. Under expectation. Under a gaze that is no longer curious, but evaluative. And still, the institution remains calm. Because calm is confidence. As Spain looks forward, the monarchy's future hangs in delicate balance, not because it is weak, but because it is evolving. The story continues. The next episode reveals pressures even more intense than today's. Moments when preparation meets reality. When questions demand answers. When the crown must show not only patience, but purpose. And as those questions deepen, one truth becomes unavoidable. This is no longer just about Princess Leonor's journey. It is about what kind of continuity Spain is choosing to carry forward. And that choice is unfolding quietly, in real time. Because continuity is never inherited automatically. It is negotiated, between past and present, between institution and people, between expectation and restraint. Princess Leonor's next chapter exists inside that negotiation. What feels calm on the surface is, underneath, a period of intense calibration. Every responsibility she accepts now is being weighed for more than competence. It is weighed for meaning. For symbolism. For how it will be remembered when today's context has faded. This distinction matters more than it appears. Spain's monarchy has learned that moments become markers whether intended or not. A first speech. A first absence. A first time standing alone rather than beside guidance. These are not milestones announced in advance. They are recognized afterward. And that is why questions are allowed to begin now. Not questions of loyalty. Not questions of legitimacy in the crude sense. But questions of direction. Direction defines reins. Notice how the institutional tone surrounding Leonor has subtly shifted. Language becomes less protective, more declarative. Not louder, clearer. The implication is gentle but unmistakable. Preparation is no longer hypothetical. And here's the moment almost nobody outside the palace fully registers. Questions do not weaken authority when they are anticipated. They strengthen it. Spain's monarchy understands this deeply. By allowing space for reflection now, the institution avoids rupture later. It invites scrutiny before it becomes confrontation. This is rarely explained in full context. Because monarchies that endure do not wait for consensus to fracture. They move ahead of it, shaping understanding quietly, patiently. And yet, Just when it seems measured, a sharper tension appears. Public curiosity is no longer passive. It is active. People are not simply watching, they are interpreting. They are comparing. They are imagining outcomes. And imagination, once engaged, cannot be easily redirected. This is the real test. Not whether Leonor can meet expectations, but whether the crown can guide expectations without appearing to manage them. Spain's monarchy is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of national identity. It carries memory, but it must also carry relevance. That balance becomes harder as questions grow more specific. The questions begin simply. What will her voice sound like? What will she emphasize? What will she leave unsaid? And then they deepen. How will she embody neutrality in polarized times? How will she represent unity without flattening difference? How will she hold authority without personalization? Each question is reasonable. None are trivial. And behind closed doors, these are not abstract debates. They are scenarios, considerations, long-term implications mapped carefully. Few realize how deliberate this process is. The monarchy's strength lies in its refusal to improvise under pressure. Instead, it prepares until improvisation is unnecessary. But history reminds us of something else. There are moments when preparation meets unpredictability. Moments when context shifts faster than institutions prefer. Moments when silence must be broken, not because it is planned, but because it is required. This is where foresight matters. Leonor's next chapter is being shaped not only for ideal conditions, but for strain. For moments when clarity must cut through noise without becoming partisan. For moments when presence must reassure without dominating. This is where thoughtful leadership begins to separate itself from inherited role. And this is why the questions matter. They are not distractions. They are diagnostics. They reveal what the public expects from the crown in a modern Spain, and what the crown must be careful not to promise. Because the crown cannot be everything. It must be consistent. Consistency, more than charisma, is the monarchy's currency. And that consistency is now being evaluated in advance. This moment, subtle as it seems, foreshadows challenges still to come. There will be pressures to accelerate, to personalize, to explain more, appear more, speak more. Some will come from genuine curiosity. Others from impatience. The institution's response will define its future. Not with resistance, but with proportion. As the next chapter unfolds, the questions will not disappear. They will evolve. They will sharpen. And eventually, they will demand answers not in words, but in conduct. That is how monarchy communicates best. Conduct over commentary. Presence over performance. Timing over impulse. And this is why the story does not resolve here. It tightens. Because when the questions begin, they do not ask for reassurance. They ask for coherence. And in the next phase, Spain's monarchy will be measured not by how loudly it speaks, but by how convincingly it moves, when the moment finally demands it. Coherence is a quiet demand, but it is relentless. Once it enters the conversation, it reshapes everything that follows. Every appearance is no longer isolated. Every decision connects backward and forward, forming a pattern that people instinctively try to read. And patterns, once noticed, become expectations. This is why the crown approaches this phase with such precision. Spain's monarchy is not reacting to questions, it is anticipating them. That difference is subtle, but decisive. Institutions that react appear uncertain. Institutions that anticipate appear grounded. This distinction matters more than it appears. Because the moment an heir's actions are interpreted as reactive, authority begins to drift. The crown must never look like it is being pushed into its future. It must appear to arrive there naturally. That is what is happening now. Leonor's next chapter is unfolding in a way that feels gradual, almost understated, yet unmistakably directional. There is forward motion, but without announcement. Progress, but without urgency. And this is not accidental. Spain's monarchy has long understood that legitimacy is strongest when it feels inevitable rather than asserted. When people sense continuity before it is declared. But here's the question quietly forming beneath all the others. What happens when inevitability meets individuality? Because no future monarch arrives as a blank slate. Leonor carries her own temperament, her own discipline, her own way of occupying space. The institution shapes her, yes, but she will also shape how the institution is experienced. That balance is now under observation. Notice how commentary has shifted from, when to how. This is a critical transition. It signals that the public conversation has accepted continuity as given, and is now evaluating character. And character, unlike ceremony, cannot be rehearsed endlessly. It reveals itself in tone, in timing, in restraint under pressure. This is why moments that appear minor suddenly matter. A pause before speaking, a choice of emphasis, a silence where words might have been expected. Each becomes data. And yet, the Crown does not rush to clarify every interpretation. Because clarity does not come from explanation. It comes from consistency over time. Spain's monarchy survives because it trusts this process. Continuity is not proven in a single moment. It is confirmed across many. And beneath the surface, this understanding guides everything. The training continues. The briefings deepen. The exposure widens carefully. Not to satisfy curiosity, but to prepare for consequence. Because there will come a moment when the questions shift again. From, what will she be like? To, is this working? That is the most delicate phase of all. It is where symbolic authority must demonstrate functional relevance. Where the Crown's presence must align visibly with national stability, without intruding into political space. Few realize how narrow that line truly is. This is the line Leonor is being trained to walk. And this is why her next chapter matters so deeply for the Crown. Not because it changes everything overnight, but because it locks certain paths into place. Once taken, they cannot be easily reversed. This is the weight of early precedent. The monarchy knows it, the advisors know it, and increasingly, the public senses it too. That sensing is what turns curiosity into attention, and attention into judgment. But here is the quiet reassurance beneath it all. Spain's monarchy has faced moments like this before. Moments when a future reign began to take shape not through declaration, but through discipline. Not through noise, but through alignment. History shows that when the Crown moves carefully at these junctures, it buys itself something invaluable. Time. Time to adapt. Time to listen. Time to let legitimacy settle rather than spike. Leonor's next chapter is designed to secure that time. Not indefinitely. Not evasively. But purposefully. Because the goal is not delay. The goal is durability. And as the questions continue to surface, measured, thoughtful, unavoidable, they do not weaken the Crown. They refine it. The story is still unfolding. And the next stage will not be announced with fanfare. It will arrive the way continuity always does. Quietly. Decisively. And only after the institution is certain that when the moment comes, the answer will already be visible, not in words, but in the way the Crown stands.